you define infrastructure and define digital, first of all, they mean different things to different people. So that's the first thing you have to understand. But I guess the way I like to look at it is, assuming digital is this explosion we've had in the last 30 years around the internet and around software and around software services, the infrastructure to support that is a huge combination of hardware companies, software companies, carriers, all types of carriers, wireless, wireline, cable carriers, people that pull fiber, et cetera, alternate carriers. And then all the people that you could say there's a lot of engines on top of that provide services on top of that infrastructure. So very complex question, frankly.
Chris, what's your take?
Sure. So coming from Facebook, we come to most of these conversations with a connectivity lens as a function of the mission of the company, as well as sort of the broader goal of internet.org, which is to try to get the nearly 60% of people who aren't online onto the internet. And so, we really think about infrastructure from the standpoint of internet infrastructure. What is the plumbing that gets people connected to other people, to the, to applications, to services, to the things that they care about. And so it's, one part pipes, the infra, the sort of the actual networks, and then the other part is some of these sort of engines that sit on top of that, data centers that provide these services. So when we talked about the cloud, like that gets pretty real when you build a data center and you've got a bunch of servers in there that are trying to meet the needs of all these users around the world.
And Dan, how do you think about, how would you frame for this audience of MBA next generation leaders in companies when they're thinking about digital strategies? How do you frame the digital infrastructure? How should they be thinking about it?
So I think when I got my start about 30 years ago at a company called Wang Labs, digital actually meant a company. It was called Digital Equipment Corp. And most people don't even remember that as a company. So that's how much change we've experienced. But I think especially Citrix, but certainly folks that are selling on top of that infrastructure, if you will, you look at it as if it's there, but to us it's really the last mile. So look at Microsoft and some of the other companies. Citrix is no exception. We design now with a mobile first kind of mindset, and that's all enabled by everything that we just talked about. So, it really comes down to whatever's that device that you're holding, and that's your connectivity back into the rest of the world. And the rest of it under it, it's a myriad of things that create it. But if it sort of comes to a point in your hand. And so that's kind of our design perspective on the whole thing.
There's a revolution going on in infrastructure. Infrastructure is moving from all of these specialized boxes, basically, to a software-driven world. And at the same time, on top of that infrastructure, you have software platforms. You could consider Facebook one of those. You could consider a lot of Google one of those. You consider some of the things Apple's doing part of that. Even these application providers are all plugging into that infrastructure, and it's changing how that infrastructure evolves and works. So it is kind of one big ecosystem now.
Yeah.
It's merged.
I think everybody's in the game more or less. Amazon definitely started a trend with, they had to build this gigantic network, and then they decided, well, geez, this is a general purpose computing platform. We can monetize it that way, and it'll make us better, and it'll provide this as a service. Google's doing that now. Citrix, believe it or not, is building out. Well, we have our GoToMeeting products and some of these other online services. So we have data centers, and the sort of, do you run it on Microsoft Azure? Do you run it in Amazon services, or do you colo and do what everybody else did to get those things to begin with? It kind of doesn't matter as much, because that layer is the enabler to then do other things on top of it. But everybody's kind of in that game, and then I'm sort of blown away by things like Google saying, well, we're just going to Wi-Fi a whole city. That's going to fundamentally change how everybody's thinking about it, because they have alternative ways to monetize what we used to have to pay for. So Starbucks, I get a cup of coffee, I have free internet. because they're monetizing it with coffee, right? Google with whatever other, mechanism that they have. So how the infrastructure is paid for, is kind of driven through the business model of the person trying to provide it. And I just think we're seeing so many different business models that whatever was there before, the assumptions just don't really apply